Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jude, for the colors on China and the socio-political trends there. I'm going to start as the moderator. I have the benefit of asking questions, fielding questions to our two experts, two panelists, and hence I will start. And as you have noticed just now, you're very privileged to have listened to two views, one coming from Hong Kong and Jude from Beijing. How I wish we could have others from Shanghai, Guangzhou, or more of the provincial speakers, but probably that is in the next Young Corporate Nation Summit, probably. All right, my first question is, this is in the interest, I believe, of all our young corporate Malaysians. With the rise in the 70s, 80s, we learn about when Japan was rising, we learn about the corporate culture of Japan. We talk about loyalty, and today it has blown right in the face with the Olympus issue scandal. But and in the West, we talk about the managerial styles of the Belgian school, the Germans, and to an extent the Brits. Now, I would like to ask our panelists, how is corporate China? How is young corporate China? What is the profile of a young corporate China, a young corporate Chinese? And I believe in your interactions with this group, you can have a sense of how they are, what they think, what are their aspirations, and can I have your views on that, please? Who would like to start first? Okay, Hugo. Yes, very difficult question, I think.
Yeah, that is a very difficult question because it is very hard to generalize. There was a book a few years ago, the English translation maybe is something like the promotion of Dulala, which was made into a movie. It was very popular, and it was sort of how to get along in the corporate world, kind of a Bridget Jones' Diary approach to the corporate world. I think young Chinese very much want to have the Western style corporate experience of openness and accountability, and then they run up against the old style, closed, more, say, cronyist kind of upper management. So there's a real generational divide, I believe, in China. And also, you know, you see quite a few of the more successful people in China actually wanting to emigrate because they're frustrated with this this style and other aspects of, you know, the government.
Emigrate where to, Hugo? Like we know Indian nationals, for instance, they are on Wall Street, they're in London, they're in all your investment banks, MNCs. Well, how about the Chinese? Where are they going?
Well, I think they generally do prefer to work for Western companies. You know, we saw some people coming back. You know, they're known as sea turtles in China, the people who have gone overseas for education and some work experience, and then they come back. But they have a difficult time because they're not, even though they grew up in China and they've only been away for a few years, they're no longer as comfortable with the culture as they were before. So they tend to face even some discrimination.
Okay, all right. So Jude, your views on young corporate Chinese?
I was just going to say, if you're going to talk about an indigenous business culture, to me, the image that comes to my head is sort of a 45-year-old Chinese businessman clutching a man purse, smoking a pack of Double Happiness cigarettes, gambeing baijiu at lunch, maybe an expensive black suit but with white socks. that's sort of my idea of the indigenous business culture.
Better white than red, yeah.
But when you talk about any aspect of a culture unique to them in the corporate world, what you see people moving into is an emulation of, if we can call it, a Western corporate culture. And this movie, Dulala Shangzhiji, was the name of this movie that was very popular. There was a TV show before that, and it reminded me of a very bad sort of late '80s sitcom. How this was shot and how everything in this happened. And what you see is that the hardware of China has very quickly caught up with the West. And I use that term I mean modernity. But what you see in the corporate culture is still that the software is to some extent lagging behind. That's changing now because you had these sea turtles and you had others who have gone and done their MBA at Harvard, and now are coming back and working for big corporations. A lot of them going into the SOEs, but that is beginning to shape the culture. But there is a very interesting aspect which I still can't quite get my head around, and I think for younger people working in a YC, a foreign enterprise, is the dream. I don't think it necessarily has to do with the fact that they're interested in that specific company. There is a cachet, there is something of providing a social status to working in a Western company.
Sorry, so is it better to work in, they feel it's better to work in JP Morgan than ICBC?
It's hard to say, but I mean, I think 5 years ago, clearly, yes, they would have rather worked for JP Morgan. Again, this rise now in the importance of the SOEs, and I think some increasing confidence is maybe changing that. But yeah, I would have to say that working for a YC is still the goal of the 23-year-old college graduate. And assimilating that culture, maybe peppering your your Chinese sentences with English, like they do in this Dulala movie, which I find infuriating. That sort of seems to me to be the culture that I observe.
Okay, I'm sad to know there's no Gordon Gekko yet of China, right? Okay, my next question. I'm only going to ask 2 questions, and we will open it just a bit. This is just to touch on what the 2 of you have mentioned just now in your speech. Corruption. You touch on local government being bad, federal being seen as good, right? But how bad is corruption? Is corruption part of the business culture in China, corporate-wise?
I think that's a hard question to answer, in part because yes, clearly, obviously. So yes, the easy answer is yes, it obviously is. There become gray notions, though, because things that are clearly defined as nepotism, right, for example, in the West, or conflict of interest, are subsumed under the word guanxi, or they also say zhouhomen, to go the back door. There are elements of Chinese business culture which, depending on your standpoint, are clearly corrupt. I'm talking about aside from government, just within sort of the business culture. So yes and no. I think clearly from a certain standpoint, corruption is right.
All right, fair enough. I think Hugo, do you want to add before I open other questions to the audience? Do you have anything? Okay. All right. I think as we are a bit behind schedule, please, the usual format. Queue up behind the 4 microphones in the hall, introduce yourself briefly, and please, as always, keep your questions short and sweet. We do not want a third panelist here. Thanks.
Hello, my name is Zekin. Jude, Hugo, ni hao. So I have 2 simple questions for 2 of the speakers. First question, sir. So if you're aware that China is practicing this very unique way of managing their citizens, it's called a 户籍制. Which means that if you want to work in certain province in China, i.e. Beijing or Shanghai, you need to have the 户籍 of Shanghai and Beijing. So this is a measure to prevent a floodgate being opened up, and that people from the west would flood into the east, which is more developed. So do you foresee this trend, this system would contribute to the brain drain? Shorter,
please.
Sorry. Do you foresee that this will lead to a brain drain in China, where excellent people from places like Yunnan cannot find their place in Beijing and try to smuggle themselves out. The second question is this, because you mentioned
Zikin,
about...
Can we stick to one question, please?
Okay, sure, thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll take 3 questions at one go. Please keep it to 1 question each, yeah?
Okay, very good morning. And my question is actually to Jude. Okay, it's quite interesting that you actually spoken about the lingering issues or the current obstacles in China, like the freedom of speech and human rights and everything. And people actually know that. Like, people tweet, people watch news and everything nowadays. People actually know that. That's more to China besides Shanghai and Beijing. The real China is like, if you visit the rural province of China and everything, you can see the real issues in China. But do you think the rest of the world actually care about the human rights and the freedom of speech that China is facing? Or they're just happy with what China can offer them, which is the huge population and the large economy? Do you think China can take the lead by just offering to the world this large economy that they have and the huge population that they have and concealing all these human rights issues and the freedom of speech? So where do you see this?
All right, thank you. Third question.
Hello, good morning everyone, and also to Hugo and also Jude. I'm Catherine here from KW Group. And I would like to ask, my question is on free trade zones in China. And Shanghai YCM has emerged as, in the FDI magazine as the #1 free trade zone. So, well, Jude, you talk about this controversy in capitalism and everything. And, well, I'm sure Hugo would like to elaborate more on this free trade zone in China and how, well, Malaysia or other parts of the world can learn about it. And as we know, India and China are very into free trade zones and special economic zones. In fact, they're very well known for it, and they have developed it to such an extent, like Tianjin Free Port and everything. So elaborate more on how we can develop our own Malaysian free trade zone. Well, Penang was once known. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. The 4th question, I'm sorry, correction, 4, we're going to take 4 questions ago.
Hi, my name is Jamie. I'm from Proton. And, well, basically, I work with the China project on the strategic development for China. And my question is such, how is Malaysia considered actually in the eyes of China as a nation in terms of produce, not in terms of political or anything, in terms of producers? There are a lot of general terms that people say Malaysia is considered as just a tourist nation, not a nation that produces high technology goods. Is that true in the eyes of the general public, in the eyes of the SME? And how can that kind of COO effect be actually, well, changed by our Malaysian government?
Okay, thank you. So 4 questions.
I think maybe Hugo would be best to take the last 2, the free trade zones.
Yeah, the free trade zone.
The one just asked.
Okay. Let's go with the brain. Let's go from the top. The brain drain question asked by Zikin. Oh, sorry, Hugo. Okay, we'll start with the free trade zone then.
Well, one of the ways that China has been very successful in the past is essentially because local government officials in the 80s and 90s were incentivized to grow their GDP in their area, and they were promoted on that basis. They made it very easy for foreign companies to do business and to trade. So essentially, it created a one-stop shop. You know, you went to the local officials, and you know, they would clear away all the bureaucratic red tape. So that red tape wasn't necessarily repealed; it was just sort of bypassed. You know, now we're seeing the consequence of not having repealed the red tape, in that it comes back. It was never really removed. So I think the preferable way to go about creating a free trade zone or any of these you know, areas that's more open to business is to maybe improve on the Chinese model, which is to not only create some government, you know, laws and regulations as the Chinese did, but also to start to repeal some of the laws that within the wider economy that are holding it back, and that are giving local officials the discretion which they can then use to hinder investment and extort rents from the businesses.
Okay. abilities to produce their corporate successes and stuff of that sort. Any of you would like to touch on that?
Well, I think that in the early stages of reform, China looked to its diaspora, to the overseas Chinese, to come back, to give back to the motherland. But now it's gone well beyond that stage, and I think Malaysian companies are viewed very much like any other country's companies, and the differences of how a company does in China very much depend on what industry it's in, rather than what country it's from, in my view. I mean, if you're in say a consumer products company like Coke, you may have no problems. If you're producing T-shirts and shoes, you may have no problem. Mm-hmm. But if you're a car maker, I'm thinking specifically of the big car companies that came into China. They ended up in recent years, as they gained market share, facing a lot of resistance, and the Chinese government now has asked them to form joint ventures again. They had sort of gotten beyond that stage, and now they're being asked to help, again, Chinese companies become their future competitors. To introduce new models, they'll have to form joint ventures and transfer their technology. So, to some extent, the more successful you are in China, the more likely you are to face government problems. I mean, it's like what the British call a tall poppy syndrome. You make too much money in China, you may run into trouble.
Same with, I think, most other countries, Indonesia especially. All right, the remaining two questions on brain drain, on views on China from other cities.
Just on the brain drain, the Hujizhi or the Hukou. I think almost by definition, if you get rid of any state-enforced internal passport and you make it easier for people to migrate, people will migrate. But the sort of the flip side of a brain drain is state-enforced brain stunting, whereby you keep smart, talented people, you keep them away from finding other smart, talented people. You keep them in their local poor neighborhood. Society, humanity, the world benefits when talent can flow to where it's most valued. And in China, that means you probably need to go to Shanghai, or Beijing, or Chongqing, or Chengdu. But staying in Liu'an, your little town in Anhui, isn't good for anybody, let alone the local population. So I would do away with the Hukou in a second. Just like I believe in free migration of people all over the world, I believe in free migration within China. The second thing, just on the Western world and human rights, I think we've seen this year, the past couple of years have been a watershed with Liu Xiaobo winning the Nobel Prize. The outpouring of support for the artist Ai Weiwei after he was in prison for 2 months earlier this year. You had the Tate Modern, right, free Ai Weiwei up on the side of it. Just to such an extent where the Chinese media wants to know what's the obsession of the West with that fat artist. Because there seems to be an article every day on Ai Weiwei. I think a lot of ground has been made in terms of the West beginning to really pay attention to the human rights situation. And just very quickly, it matters because shame can do a lot to make a country change its policies. You can shame China into changing its human rights policies. It's not a panacea, it's not going to fix everything, but international pressure, writing letters to your congressman, media coverage, all this can do a lot to bring to light these practices, because the last thing I'll say is China wants to be considered a modern 21st century country. When you talk about its barbaric 16th century practices of torture, it embarrasses China. So I think paying more attention would be even better, but yes, it has an effect, and we should keep it up.
Just to add to that, I mean, I think domestically we're seeing a big change. I mean, the days when Chinese authorities could say that it was only Westerners who cared about these issues is passing. There are a lot of Chinese now who are concerned about Ai Weiwei, concerned about Chen Guangcheng, trying to go and visit him. So it's something that actually we have to pay attention to, also from the question of, is